Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Good CEOs. This came around because about 2 years ago, when the recession hit, I formed this little group called Good CEOs. It was only 5 people then. I decided to get somebody from every corner of the creative industry, whether it was a digital transformation studio or an influencer agency or an ad agency. And my idea was, if I can get a group of people like that together that could meet every 6 weeks and exist in a WhatsApp group, what kind of interesting stuff can we learn together so we can all run our businesses better? Anyway, we started it. We brought in a coach, a man called Sam Pierce, who co-runs it with me. And it was the most wonderful room ever. This kind of weird little experiment really paid off, because I think being a CEO can feel quite lonely, and I think a lot of CEOs have to be the CEO in every conversation they have. Whereas when you put CEOs in other rooms or in a room together, suddenly that kind of, the mask falls away because everyone's doing the same job. So we did that for 2 years, and the group grew from 5 to 10 to now I think it's like 65 people. And I promised to the Good CEOs that I would keep it exclusive and anonymous, and very much Chatham House rules. Otherwise, you don't get the honesty in the room, which I will always do, and I will make sure that we keep that up. However, for me, it seems like such a waste to have this incredible group of people, these incredible learnings, and not sharing it with other people that might want to become a CEO or want to become a better CEO and learn from different CEOs. So that's why we're starting this podcast. We're starting Good CEOs because we want to help people that are either trying to become CEOs or become better CEOs become better and learn something perhaps they didn't know before. We're going to root this in how things are feeling, and then we're going to root things in facts. So that's how we're going to structure it. It's going to be very much around like what I'm seeing and what we're kind of coming across with Unknown. Unknown, if you don't know, is a talent growth consultancy that I founded. We have over 1,000 conversations from here to Nairobi to New York to LA. It really is broad, the conversations that we have. So it feels wasted not to share those with people and the insights that we're pulling out from those conversations. So that's going to be how we run these sessions. Sometimes we'll have a guest on speaking about a specific topic. Sometimes it will be just me, but there'll always be facts, feelings, and of course, the most important thing, futures. We'll be making future predictions for the year. I can't promise you they'll all be correct, but there'll be things to think about. Some of them will become true, and I'll just claim those ones, and I won't talk about the ones that are false. So that's Good CEOs. I really hope you enjoy this. So this is episode 1 of Good CEOs, and I'm going to give you 3 facts, and then I'm going to tell you who the guest is and what we're going to be speaking about. So 3 facts. Fact number 1, the creative industry is valued at $4 trillion, which is the equivalent GDP of Germany. That's massive, right? So we can say that the entire creative industry is contributing as much as Germany every year. Wow. Okay. Fact number 2, the creative industry is going to double in size within the next 5 years. So by 2030, the global GDP of the creative industry will be 10%, which is the same size as healthcare. Fact number 3, over 60% of CEOs have said that brand is their primary growth lever. That's not performance marketing, that's brand. B-R-A-N-D. I haven't got another comparative fact for you on that, but all I have is the fact in itself. And what does that say? That says that we're investing in brand, we're investing in distinctiveness, and therefore this episode is going to be life-changingly interesting. So this episode, who have we got? We have one of our good CEOs who is removing their anonymity for this one episode. He is one of my favorite CEOs that I've worked with. I find this man so interesting because he hasn't been at one type of agency in his experience. He started off in brand consulting, then he moved into advertising, and then he moved into social. So that's quite rare to have someone that's gone brand, which is like direct to CEO branding agencies, Wolf Olens, Koto kind of style businesses. Then into advertising, how do we communicate your idea? You're looking at an Adam and Eve DDB or a McCann. And then into social, right? The fastest growing part of our economy. You could put influencer agencies into this category. You could put any company that appears online. I mean, this is kind of everyone now, right? But a specialist, you could argue even the OG social agency, We Are Social. It is none other than the esteemed Toby Southgate.
Oh.
So, okay, look, before we get into these predictions, because I'm very excited, and giving some background to the listener, we had our final Good CEOs meeting, and there was some warm wine, there was some Prosecco and champagne flowing, and we asked each Good CEO to give some kind of prediction about the future. What are you going to see in 2026? And there were some strong predictions, none as strong as yours. And there were actually 3 more that we've discounted. But it got to the end, and I was thinking, God, poor Toby's got to go last. Wow, you stood up, you read out these, and then you sort of just fucked off and got a train. It was like this cloud of smoke happened. So I was like, wait, I want you to elaborate more on these predictions, because they're pretty bold. I can understand and see how they might happen, but I really want to get into them. But before we get into each of these predictions, I have 2 questions to ask you. Are you ready? Okay, but my first question is, in a word, or in a quote, it could be anything, how are you feeling about the creative economy right now?
Oh. That's a really good question, and not the one that I had prepped for. How am I feeling? Well, I have deep and unshakable belief in the core value of our broad church creative industries, right? So optimistic would be the obvious catch-all phrase, as long as we can acknowledge that we're working in a world of chaos and uncertainty, and maybe those 2 dynamics are more pointed than ever at this moment in time, January the 19th, 2026. And in that chaos, I believe, and partly because of the industry we're in, chaos is a ladder, not a pit. And that is a Game of Thrones reference. I'm not even a huge Game of Thrones fan, but I just love that point of view, that just because it's, dependent on your degree of optimism, hard, shitty, there's a lot of negative stuff happening, there's lots of mud throwing, there's a bunch of geo-economic and political stuff that we should all be aware of. It impacts our industry. But that's where I will focus, that in that chaos there remains opportunity. You got to see it, you got to choose to be optimistic and forward-facing about it all. You got to be a little bit combative, I think, a little bit sharp-elbowed. It's not time for being recessive and wallflowery, in my opinion. But that's what I'm focusing on, the opportunity in the chaos.
I really like that. Before I move on to the second question, I just want to prod on that, because I don't know if it's just this like new year, new me, galloping horse feeling, or new hip. Maybe it's my new bionic hip. But I feel like a change has happened. I feel like, this been 2025 January, and you said what you just said. I don't know if the world would have felt ready enough to be climbing out of the pit and seeing the chaos that we were in a year ago as a ladder out of where we were. So my hunch is to go, I really align with that. But do you think, or can you put your finger on anything else changing in the last 12 months to allow that to feel more optimistic for a CEO or for somebody within this industry?
Look, I mean, I think I do this thing if ever I'm interviewing people, I want to know what they think about the future of the industry and where they think it will be, which is why I can be super comfortable talking about, you said strong predictions, right? They're not really predictions. They're just really sort of big and potentially provocative thoughts that loads of people have, but don't necessarily share. And I think having an opinion on where the industry is going and why it's in the position it's in is a really good thing, because the only certainty is it's going to continue to change and be different. And if you feel that it's okay to sort of be a passenger on the train, then, there's going to be, you can expect to get hit and impacted by some of those dynamics that are happening, you might have the view in that case that those dynamics are happening above you and around you and adjacent to you, but there's not something you can do anything about. Whereas the reality is that I think being in this kind of industry, whatever your function or whatever your level, whatever your role, you can make a change, because the only thing this industry is driven by is human beings and their brains. And therefore you're in a little bit more control than you might think. You have agency. And the decisions that we make every day, and we all make lots of them, have an impact on what comes next. If anyone or anything could genuinely predict the future, the notion of the need to adapt through change would be destroyed.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So, I get to that point, just like focus on the thing. Change is the only constant. And whether or not we had this discussion a year ago, I think people would have acknowledged that there was something and a bunch of things happening. Some very obvious things like Omnicom and IPG and where that conversation has ended up. Very obvious things like, what AI tools are we using in our agency to drive efficiency and different output? Like those are big, obvious, seismic, systemic things. But if you wait for the answers, you're going to get hit by something you couldn't predict or didn't expect. Because no one can predict or expect the outcomes that actually come to pass. You can just shape them. They are shaped by the decisions that we make and the things that we do and say every day.
Ooh, I like that. And that is a perfect segue to my second question, which is around inflection points and taking action, right? I like to think, what is it? Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but looking back, you can find so much wisdom. You're a global CEO of an 1,100 person business with one of the biggest private equity backers in the world, AKA you're trusted with a lot of responsibility, but you didn't get there overnight. What I want to know is, can you think of one action that you took that led to your biggest inflection? And it could be before you became a CEO. It might be, you can think.
Absolutely. And it might sound a bit kind of, personal rather than professional, but the truth is they were like dynamically and intrinsically connected. I got asked, and let me think of when this happened. The middle of 2025, spring of 2025. I was working in an independent creative agency, tiny business, really good. I was enjoying it immensely. I just got to a kind of management board level for the first time. I think I was client services director or something. And I was asked by a direct competitor, to go to New York and set up a new office for their business. This business was tiny, like a quarter of the size, maybe even smaller. And they'd never grown outside of their home market. It was a business of maybe 20, 22 people at the time. And I'd never been to America. And not only did I say yes, I would do that and give it a shot, I had to call my then girlfriend, who was living and working in Dubai. And I'd been looking for a job in Dubai. I hadn't got one. And I had to say to her, look, I've been offered this job. Good news. That's the good news. The bad news is not in Dubai, it's in New York. And I want you to come. And I know that means a bunch of other things. And I'm not getting down on one knee, but I want to do this and I want you to do it with me. And I can't do it. If I can't do it with you, I'm probably not going to do it. Yeah. So my point of view then became, well, I really want to do this job. I really want to be with this person. They are now 8,000 miles apart. And I asked Alice, she'd also never been to the United States of America. And she said yes. And It was because she said yes that we went on that adventure. And up to that point, I was 6 or 8 years into my career. I've been in the same city for more than a decade. And I wasn't really thinking about ambition, globality. What do I think of this industry I work in? I was just, kind of enjoying being a relatively young, relatively professional person in an industry that I'd come to love. But I didn't know where I wanted to go. And it was that decision, that was an inflection point for me. If Alice had said no, I'd have probably said no to the job, tried to find something in Dubai, maybe got it one day, maybe not. But I know I wouldn't be here now. And that was a moment that changed the next 20 years for me. It brings us up to today. Alice is my wife. We have 3 amazing kids. We've lived in three continents. We've moved with the kids 7 or 8 times, mostly between London and New York.
Wow.
But yeah, it's like that was a moment that was bigger for me than the job, and it was personal as much as professional, but without which I would not have been open to saying yes to some of the things I've said yes to subsequently.
It's almost like it opens up another. It's like you are what you do, not what you say you do, and you train yourself. Well, I took that decision, so why can't I do the next one? And you're rather than staying comfortable and familiar, you've gone for this thing that wasn't an obvious move, but you've been pulled to go and do it. I'm trying to think about the person that's maybe listening to this, going, "Should I do that thing? Should I go transatlantic? Should I take the PE back thing? Should I leave this holding company job?" I like that. Okay, speaking of agencies, your first prediction. So you've written here, the big six become three.
Big six, these 6 biggest, currently publicly owned, publicly listed marketing services holding companies, have been for a while. And of course, the 6 is already 5. So I'm not saying I was cheating, because I don't think it had actually been ratified when we had our wrap up. It was very, very likely to happen. But yes, that was a discussion we had, and I posited that those 6 big publicly owned, publicly listed, publicly traded marketing services holding companies would become 3 over time. I did.
Why? I want to know, well, from both sides here, why originally for the people that own the company or that have the biggest interest in the company's shareholders, stakeholders, and why, this is probably a trick question, for the clients and the people that work for the business.
Oh, well, I'll be honest about that. I think these changes are decisions made for that first group, like very much not for the second, right? The conversations and appeasement, support, advocacy of the second group, critically important. But, Omnicom acquired IPG. Right? It was a takeover. It wasn't a merger. It has its genesis in corporate activity that happened in the sector a long time ago, a decade ago. Didn't happen. Omnicom and Publicis were going to merge at one point. A couple of years was spent working through that, and it didn't happen. So this combination was executed in a very different way. And overwhelmingly, the primary interest, and I think it's sort of super important to be clear on this, the primary interests of people that run big corporate public companies are shareholders. You said it. There are a list of stakeholders on those people's agendas, and those people stay in their jobs, make progress in those roles, get well rewarded for those roles because they absorb all of the pressures, and there are many that go with being, executive leadership in a public company. Why do I think there will be fewer? Well, and to be clear on this, I'm not suggesting that 2 or 3 more of them go away. I'm suggesting that their ownership models change and evolve. And most of that is to do with the degree of disruption that is happening in the industry right now. Lots of that has to do with technology in some shape or form, and by the way, I'm talking sort of broadly and in the macro sense, not, how is your holding company using AI tools for efficiency? I'm talking about, the vast majority of the S&P 500 value being tied up in 7 companies. I'm talking about the sort of overwhelming notion of power, influence, and let's say, therefore, the impact of governmental decisions and the geo-economic situation that we're in, the influence of big tech over the world in general, including political leadership, is fairly well covered at the moment, let's just say. And in that environment, making change to the way that any kind of publicly owned organization that is not a tech business or a tech platform, making changes to the way those businesses are organized and the way that they run is hard, slow, expensive in public ownership. Because big decisions require big change, and big change costs money, and spending money for return in that environment is sometimes a challenging thing to do. Companies, public and private, but in the public world, some kinds of companies, high growth shares, high growth stocks, high growth technology businesses, get disproportionately rewarded, not for making profits, but for shareholder return on the basis of growth.
Yeah.
Right? More traditional businesses in public ownership do not get rewarded for spending lots of money, in brackets debt, or borrowing lots of money, or spending money in a very circular way amongst sector peers. They don't get rewarded for that. They get rewarded on the basis of people giving them money to do something, sell them something, make them something, execute a purchase. And the wild variation in the valuations of those businesses in public land, in public company land, are evident, right? You know, the PE ratios of Target, a retailer in the US, are vastly different to the PE ratios of Tesla. Tesla's PE ratios are vastly different to Ford's or General Motors. And that creates an economic imbalance. And as I said, because they have existed for decades and in some cases, you know, over 100 years, the traditional big six publicly owned marketing services holding companies are all decades old, established, for want of a better description, legacy businesses. They are pre-digital businesses, and therefore have grown up, scaled, acquired, integrated, built these networks, or accumulated these networks that were best in class, fit for purpose, providing, relatively speaking, consistent high quality services to big multinational marketers.
Yep.
And they don't need those infrastructures any longer. The infrastructures you accumulate as you build those things are massive. Tens of thousands of people, hundreds of offices, in some cases hundreds of brands. And the changes that we've seen in the structures of these groups already indicate sufficiently that the future cannot and does not need necessarily to be that scale of people. I would personally have an issue with that. I think the scale of people is not the core problem. But structurally, brands, organizational layers, what you are operating and taking to market within those groups is changing and evolving pretty quickly. And there's been more change and evolution in the last 12 months, maybe 24 actually, than maybe in the prior decade or so. Brands coming together, aligning differently inside their groups, things merging over others, brands being pedestalized, other brands being retired or sunset. So much change that you have to conclude, or I conclude, that there are opportunities for the futures of those businesses, their clients and their people, that are different to ongoing, trying to rebuild, reset and redirect big public businesses. They might find more progress, more success, faster progress, happier clients, happier people, if they find ways to purposefully and intentionally step towards different ownership models. Because trying to do that stuff when you're a public company is hard, expensive and time consuming, and not particularly rewarding either.
When you're saying changing ownership models, so we're talking about moving from privately owned company, Tesla being a publicly listed company, and then OpenAI, for example, being a privately owned business. Why? Okay, we've got the six become three. I, in my head, imagined a merger there, or one just falling, or a couple just falling off. You know, so falling so quickly to the floor that they're not part of the big six anymore. Are you speaking about are you speaking about both of those things, or one in particular?
No, I'm speaking definitely about both of those things, because the big six is something of a fallacy anyway, right? Define big, right?
Yeah.
Count, scale, revenue, profit. There's a layer of other companies. They're not the only six public marketing services holding companies. S4 is a publicly listed marketing services holding company. Stagwell is a publicly listed marketing services holding company. M&C Saatchi. There are plenty of them. So I think Big Six totally obliterates, because they are all shifting shape and size, irrespective of ownership. And you can see that some of the progress that's been made by some of those groups that are not the traditional Big Six is already more interesting, more progressive. Start with less, grow faster. I'm a former employee of Stagwell's, and some of the things that business has done are remarkable. And they don't truly get enough credit for some of the things they've done. They announced last week they're spinning out Sports Beach as a standalone business and entertainment property. A P&L has its own leader. Right? That that's one example of several where that business is not encumbered by the tens of thousands of people and the hundreds of offices of infrastructure that a traditional Big Six firm has, led by a guy who's been in some very interesting places, including Microsoft. Might be an indication of some of the changes or strategic direction that we'll see shifting at WPP also under Cindy. And I think there are other places that will change as well. Yeah. So the shift will happen, and the Big Six will not, I think overarching Big Six won't be a reference point anymore, because it will be more like a group of public companies that stay public, and some become smaller, some become bigger, but there'll be an awareness and an awakening that other groups can now take on some of the challenges, some of the scaled clients, some of the media-driven relationships that traditionally are out of reach of a company doing, I don't know, $1 billion of revenue or a few $1 billion of buying. Some slices of business, some accounts, some AOR relationships certainly are just out of reach without the scale, particularly on the media side of the business, of the Big Six. So they'll squash, move, extend anyway. And then there is the direct issue of ownership. Like WPP has fallen out of the FTSE 100, right? That doesn't mean it's not one of the Big Six. It's still publicly listed. It's in the FTSE 250. It's still a business worth a few £1 billion. But there are different options, and there will be different options, as some things, you mentioned Dentsu is one of the Big Six. Again, just last week, and since I made these predictions, since we had that discussion about what might happen in 2026, as the investment advice health warning, right? This isn't advice, this is just observation. Like Dentsu's international business has been up for sale. They haven't found a buyer. Not only have they not found a buyer, some of the critique of potential buyers through the process, as has been reported publicly, is not complimentary, not only to Dentsu's international business, but to this whole category. Like big legacy holding companies look a little challenged, and that's the voice of the market, and it's important. And I don't think perhaps we talk about those things enough. That the market has spoken, and Dentsu's international business is not worth to any potential purchaser what it looks like it's worth on paper, or what Dentsu in Japan wanted to get for it. Right? That conversation is not over. They need to find an answer, and their options now are fewer than they were 2 weeks ago or 6 months ago when the process began. I'm fascinated, back to that point about the interview question, I'm personally fascinated to see what happens there. Who steps in? Is there a merger amongst the Big Six of Dentsu's international business and another one to find some increased scale, to find some increased competitive edge? Or does somebody interesting and private step in and take it out? Restructuring something in private ownership is relatively easy, relatively fast, relatively pain-free, requires very little permission or reporting. You can manage and run a privately held business within the boundaries of governance models, of course, acceptable governance models, but you're out of the spotlight from a reporting point of view. And a huge amount of time and energy goes into the reporting aspect of running a public company. So I'm fascinated by the indicators of what happens. Right? I don't think I see another merger or takeover amongst those six, but I definitely see opportunities for both private equity, outside investors, and also for I don't want to say the next tier. I don't want that to be disparaging. As I said, I think some of the most interesting growth-orientated conversations in the industry are coming from places like M&C and Stagwell, and also some of the bigger private equity-owned groups that have an ability to make quick decisions, right? And actually are also oriented towards growth, having growth-oriented discussions, not reshaping, resizing, restructuring kinds of conversations. That's part of it, but it's not the dominant conversation.
Yeah, it works as a nice segue to our second prediction. Someone once put it to me as the difference between being in a holding co versus being in a PE-backed company. In a holding co, you're playing not to lose, and in a PE-backed company, you're playing to win. And I feel like even if you just put it as simply as that, we've got reductions here. What was it? Omnicom losing 7,200 people, WPP 7,000 people, Dentsu 3,400. There's over 20,000 job losses in these larger holding companies, playing not to lose because they need to keep that margin growing and reporting to the street the 5 to 10% growth, right? Whereas there is this wonderland, and I want to get into the wonderland, if you'll let me call it that, which is a wonderland that you exist in, right? So, like, giving context, you came from an IPG-owned business, McCann. You were then part of the Stagwell Group. Again, these are big companies, these are billion-dollar businesses, and you're running these, companies within these companies. And then you've left and joined a company that is a private equity-backed company called We Are Social. So there's no reporting to the street per se. There's no earnings calls that you have to go on necessarily to report to some analyst who's going to berate you for, not hitting the numbers, the double-digit growth. So you're now at a PE-backed group. Your second prediction is that 2026 will be the first billion-dollar independent holding company. Can you tell me more about what that would look like and why?
Well, that's a different question. It could look like anything. It could look like lots of things. Again, and I get, optimism, enthusiasm. I'm a wild advocate for what we do, right? For our industry, and I think our industry needs more advocacy. It's a brilliant industry to work in. Agencies can be phenomenal places. There are some incredible people. I love it. I'm into it. I have been for 20 plus years, and I'm going to be in it for as long as I possibly can be. So it could look like anything, right? But I want to be clear on my prediction was that we will see the first billion-dollar independently owned and built, probably therefore PE backed, right? I don't mean it would be a wild cheat. And so I want to be clear that I'm not predicting this, although it might happen. If any one of those big six companies was taken out by private equity, engineered its own private equity takeover, it would be the first billion-dollar indie. I don't mean that. That's cheating. I think there are plenty of very interesting, very growth-oriented, very digitally and technologically literate businesses with ambition, with ambitious leaders either behind them or increasingly being recruited into them. And you and I will both know plenty of examples of that already, where the notion of any one of them reaching $1 billion, and I want to be clear about what I mean by the $1 billion, why the $1 billion thing is interesting as well. But the notion of them setting out to build something like that is clear. It's what they're doing anyway.
Yeah.
Their backers require them and expect themselves. They are interested by driving growth for return, creating value to drive business growth to create a return on investment. And there is nothing more pure than that in the world of business and commerce, right? I personally found it incredibly refreshing when I was talking about joining this company and taking on this role, that it was so explicit and overt. And I realized just how healthy that is. And I'll also be transparent about it. It's quite scary for the first time after being in, a couple of independent agencies and then 3 holding companies. It's quite scary thinking about, the prevailing narrative or the predominant narrative that I had always heard is, PE has a reputation, right? It's coming in for its pound of flesh and it wants to execute a plan and take the money out as quickly as they can. So that prevailing narrative is not accurate in my experience. It may be for some. In my experience, in this category, I've had sort of, I've been in the job a year. And so I've been talking about the job for, 15, 16 months. And my experience is the absolute focus and orientation from our investors and owners and from my boss is what do we need to do to grow faster, get better, like create more sustainable growth. And that language set is super exciting and compelling to be a part of. So my hypothesis was, and it's more thesis actually than prediction, that someone is going to take a huge jump this year. That someone who's already PE funded and therefore independent, or PE built, funded and independent, or who's recently done a deal, PE funded, will find something transformationally interesting to buy or build, possibly as a result of some of the falling out that we've seen in the big six and consolidation, above from a scale perspective. and use those opportunities to get to a scale. And this is where I come to the money thing. It's less about the money, more about the influence. If you're $1 billion, you get into rooms and get into conversations with clients and on bits of business that are out of reach, no matter how good you are, to a 50, 70, 100, even 200 person, or 50, 70, even $200 million business. If you're $1 billion, you can get in the room. And you can get in the room either because you're telling a really interesting, compelling, new, different story. You can get in the room because you've probably got leaders who can get you in there, networks, relationships, history, legacy, or you just have the sheer influence. Right? You look interesting and different. And if you're a big client-side marketer, at the moment and for the foreseeable future, and I can see this happening already, it has been happening for more than a year, you're more interested in an interesting, different, engaging, surprising conversation with a potential agency partner, possibly than ever. And again, largely because of the disruption, you could possibly say distraction of everything that's been happening within the big traditional 6 public holding companies, and because of the kind of invasive degree of conversation and expectation around the way in which technology is impacting these businesses. There's something that he said that I found utterly fascinating, that Artur Sadoun, who runs Publicis, talked about feeling really good that if the Omnicom IPG thing went through, it would mean that Publicis would be the number 2 again. that being the number 1 comes with pressure and challenges, and that Publicis felt better as a challenger, always has been a challenger to WPP and Omnicom. And becoming number 1 because of a few years of sustained strategic focus created a different kind of headache, a different kind of challenge. But I found it super telling that Artur was happy to talk about that. Like, it'd be nice to be number 2 again.
Yeah.
I think that's incredibly smart.
I like this. So, okay, this is where I find it really interesting, because there are companies out there, MSQ, if we just talk about the UK, right, where you could call it a roll-up. You could call it, I mean, lots of people call these things different things, right? Where a mid-market roll-up, when you're going from, 2 to 600 million and you're trying to build to that billion, which is a really unromantic name for, group shared services and, everything else. Where I think someone's done an incredible job in bringing the humanity and benefit to the people that are joining this rolled-up collection of agencies, but also making it aspirational for the brands that are engaging with that holding company, is common interest. Mm-hmm. And I think, just tapping into your predicting what's going to happen, I think we're going to stop seeing people naming companies after themselves. No offense, DDB, JWT, or Wonderman, I can go on, right? And I think this is going to be the era of these independent holding companies, where we're speaking about a spirit or philosophy that ties us all together, and not one that's being reverse engineered. I have my theory, and no one's yet done this, and I don't understand why. Maybe you can tell me why. My theory is, what influencer marketing, creator businesses are flying and doing very, very well. You can pass a lot of money through these businesses. They are the media to the creative agency of 2026. One could argue. Okay,
keep going.
Okay.
I have opinions on this, but keep going.
Not just that, but we are now getting real-time consumer feedback from influencer marketing campaigns. Some that are guiding brands in their new product development, right? So you could argue, in some influencer agencies, they are now advising at the highest level to CMOs and in some cases CEOs. That hasn't been the case for really any type of company, I don't think, at that end of the scale. My thinking is, why no one has brought together a strategic consultancy, i.e. like the first place that you ever worked in your career, and an influencer marketing agency, and brought that CEO to both of those conversations, because the world has changed. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if a Wolf Olins came together with a Buttermilk, or if a Goat came together with a Koto? Because something interesting, I think, could happen there. Am I being deluded? Would that work? The margins are similar. Tell me.
I mean, look, there's a lot in there. I am, for what it's worth, I would would have common interest also on my short list of that's exactly the kind of business, and Anthony is exactly the kind of leader I had in mind when I was thinking through, who's going to thrive in the next 12 months, right? And there, it's partly being purpose-led. I mean, I hate that phrase, by the way, that I'm not shitting on you, but I don't like that phrase, but standing for something and having some principles around how you run and build your business, that's unequivocally attractive to the kind of talent that both contributes most effectively to our kind of businesses and is uncomfortable with status quo generally.
Yeah.
Right. If you're comfortable with status quo and you're in a reasonably well-paid mid to senior management job in a big holding company and you've survived to now, hold on for dear life, right? Because you're also, by definition, probably not the kind of person that's going to be super comfortable going to a scrappy indie and helping get it from 10 to 100 or 100 to 1,000 people. So Anthony's business, common interest, also you look at the brands they've already acquired, the people they've already hired or invested in to build something, those are exactly the kind of leaders, I believe, who will be at the forefront of our industry in a decade. So forget the next 12 months, right?
Yeah.
And however long it takes, I think Anthony's business will get there. You mentioned MSQ. That's definitely another one, a bit of a misunderstood British business, I think, that has probably done a lot more good than a lot of people realize. Hired some really good people recently as well, by the way, and has a good diversity of capability. Yeah. I'm fascinated by Studio One, Jazz's new business. I'm fascinated to see what Tiffany and the leadership team at RGA do now in private ownership. There is depth. Dimmy has hired some incredible people. It's a way bigger business than most people realize.
4,000 people and $4 billion worth of media managed.
And heavily invested by Carlyle, top of the range people in most places. Yeah. I'm fascinated by that one. We're having this conversation in the UK, but if you think about the wider EU and EMEA footprint, Service Plan is a powerhouse business. People often forget or don't even realize that's independently owned, and have also, like common interest, made some really smart investments in people. Yeah. They have a small stake. I don't know if you would call it seeded. I don't know what the trade press says, but have a small stake in Ace of Hearts. They've backed Rick Brim and Polly, and that's a brilliant team as well. A team that any holding company would want running their creative companies.
Yeah.
The fact is that those people, and I haven't asked them, I don't know, but that's a layer of people who are, now I'm going to who are 35 to 50 years old, not 50 to 65 years old, who have got a couple more chapters in them, no question, who are the best, amongst the best there are at what they do, and who have already actively chosen to take this route. Alex Lubar at Fundamental Co. There's another one. Fundamental Co. would be on my list too. Seasoned, grown up, proper global professionals, multi-award winning, if that means the right thing to you. But these are just top-notch talent.
Yeah.
Who have seen or have chosen or who have decided or resolved, whatever it is, to bake their next chapter into something outside those traditional big six. Every single one of whom, by the way, has had some experience inside one or other of them, and in some cases more than one. And that I found, Mother, we haven't talked about Mother. These things are massively, massively compelling. And in a world of change and disruption, I'm not going to speculate as to what any one of these individuals might or might not be thinking about. But again, why was I comfortable talking about this? Because it excites me. Same. Because I want people to be excited about the industry that we work in. Same. And I want people to want to grab it and make a change, not just hold on to where they are and hope that they get another bonus next year and that they don't get, efficiencyed out of something, because that's really fucking depressing. I'd rather be on the bright side of it. And it's genuinely exciting. There's been more of this in the last chunk of time than at any point in my 20 plus years in agencies. And I love it.
And we know that there's $3 trillion worth of PE dry powder sitting there waiting to go. It's interesting. And this, again, a beautiful segue. Wow. Hello. Not hosted for a podcast in over 6 months, and I'm here. I'm proud of myself.
You're
Toby.
good at it, dude. You're
Thank
good at it.
you.
Yeah,
I'm thrown into this. Well, you know what? You mentioned two things.
The podcast world has missed you.
Thank you very much. The two things that segue nicely into this is mother, and I'll come back to why mother. And then the second thing is this idea of a revived brand getting acquired, okay, which is your third prediction that you've made here.
Yeah.
Prediction 3 is that PE revives a killed brand, and then I put in brackets here, DDB, sunset, and JWT. I don't even know if you call that sunset now. I think that's buried. Where does the sun go beyond when there's no moonlighted? Maybe, I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't know.
But it's funny because there were rumors at one point, because mother. I'll tell you why my segue was so bloody good. Because mother is the LVMH of holding co's or independent holding co's. They obviously believe in brand and the power of brand. And the main thing is, I think their investment strategy was really simple. Robert Saville said, it's something like if creativity can't improve its growth, then we don't want to invest in it, kind of thing. And I think I heard there were rumors that when JWT was originally being sunset by Mark Reed and the guys at VML, there was a phone call that happened, apparently, which was, wow, hey, we want to buy that little brand that you're killing off called J. Walter Thompson. Can you sell it to us? Which would have been the most remarkable flex.
Well, it's like, it would have been, and something like that would still be, and none of it has happened yet. I'm kind of fascinated by it. So, and it reminds me. Sorry, I know you're going to finish your question, but it reminds me of that story, and this obviously ages me, but I love it. It speaks to a time when the industry as a whole, and particularly in the UK, had, frankly, some fucking balls about it. When Saatchi and Saatchi famously bid for the Midland Bank, right? Midland Bank, a high street bank, became HSBC. Saatchi and Saatchi tried to buy it, as in the brothers tried to buy it. Well, by the way, while Sorrell was their CFO, and I don't know if it's now ancient history, right? But yeah. Can you imagine right now the notion that an ad agency
buying a bank,
right? That's what I want to get back to. That's what that push for $1 billion indie has some stake in the game, like some profile, some ability to shape the things that are happening in the real world around it. I would love to see, I'd love to read that. Claire's Accessories. I've got 3 kids, 2 girls. I spend some time in high streets. I spend some time in Claire's Accessories, right? Like cheap, shiny stuff that little kids love.
We'll clip that one. If we can just get that into clip, that's perfect. That one clip there. Thanks, Toby.
You're welcome. It's busted, right? It's for sale, and someone's going to make a fuck ton of money. I would love to see Ace of Hearts say, we're going to buy Claire's Accessories.
Oh, yeah. Gets
us 300 UK storefronts. And what would they do with that for their brands or their clients? I'd love to see Uncommon do that, right? They're now in Havas, of course, or 50, 40, whatever, partly Havas. I'd love to see someone with some balls creatively do something of that kind of scale. So yes, go on to your question about the rescuing a murdered brand.
I love this. Well, no, because where you've taken this kind of murdered brand it could be away from a killed off agency brand, because I'm thinking like, oh God, is the upside worth the risk of going after a JWT or a DDB? Does the market care enough? Are you going to suddenly win clients because they've forgotten that? Does the IP of the brand really mean enough to the buyer, the CMO of Unilever, Hellmann's?
I think that's like a storytelling question.
As in how you tell the story behind why you bought the. Yeah.
I think so. It's not that any of them have anything specifically, proprietary or unique about them. that was never really the point. But there is, which is why so many of them are named after old white men, right? But there is some magic in the history and the storytelling. Like I don't judge it in any way, but I spent 10 years nearly working at WPP, and I never worked for JWT, but I was proud to be part of the story of the world's longest standing advertising agency relationship. They basically built, from Lever Brothers soap through to still working with Unilever today, even though JWT, went under Wonderman and is now in VML. They still work with Unilever. So that is a story that I find sort of magical. Right? It's like seeing, like, one of my favorite favorite speakers in the industry is John Hegarty, and some of he built a very famous agency on a handful of really simple principles with a couple of friends. And some of the stuff that he talks about now is more relevant than ever.
Yeah.
And so the storytelling and the magic is still there. There's just fewer and fewer people able to deliver it. And so, I would love to see JWT resuscitated as part of, Common Interest, for example. I would love to see. I mentioned him, I've sort of dreamt about this. I haven't spoken to anyone. I know nothing, but I would love, I'd love Fundamental Co. to announce that they'd bought the DDB brand out of Omnicom. Omnicom has killed it. They don't want it. They don't believe in it. They've subsumed it under something else. Alex used to run it, and by all accounts, I mean, he's a brilliant leader. He's a very ambitious guy. He's been hired for lots of reasons. Why wouldn't you spend whatever it takes when you're not buying the infrastructure or the people to buy the broken brand? Like, it is the history of the industry. WPP means Wire and Plastics Products Limited. Right? Martin bought it off the shelf because it is cheaper to buy an existing UK registered entity than register a new one. And he spent 35 years imbuing WPP with meaning and buying brands underneath it that would support and elevate that meaning. Like, it's the history, it's what the job is. So if Alex and Johnny Bauer could get hold of DDB for whatever the number is, the brand, right? Mm-hmm. And it's what fashion houses do. These things are resuscitated. The story is told again. It's resurfaced, it's repackaged for a new environment or a new era, for a new audience, a new customer. And there are numerous wild success stories. So I really hope something like that does happen in our industry. And if that's a step to getting on the route of buying broken brands and fixing them, well, that's what marketing is supposed to do anyway, right?
Yeah. This, by the way, we've missed one, and there's a company that no one's really that aware of called Closer. CEO is a man called Peter Revile, who's like incredible, ex-CEO of Mother. And I believe that the Claire's accessories part of what you're talking about is what they're literally doing. Assets that are declining in value, billion-dollar assets that are becoming million-dollar assets or 100 million. Can we buy that off you at a great price, rebrand it, retell a story, build in whatever narrative we need to do, and then bring it back and triple it or 10x it or whatever?
Yeah, that is. I agree, and I think that's implausible in a big six holdco. Yeah. Right. It's perfectly plausible in private ownership, because the only thing these are human capital businesses, right? Whether they're 100,000 or 100, the only thing we have to sell is the brains of our people, and so what they spend their time on, if it is timesheeted and audited up the wazoo, it's problematic to say, actually, we want to take on this broken thing, invest some time in it, craft a story around it, take it to market, see if we can generate a return. Right? Let's just say that's not going to fly, right? Very often, and certainly it's not going to fly at any kind of scale. But that is what, that's what RGA Ventures did. It's what, Anomaly does sometimes and doesn't get anything like the credit for it that it deserves. And it is perfectly plausible. It's a really good test. The thing that it also embraces, by the way, is that creative companies, agencies of all kinds, on the whole, spend significant chunks of that human capital giving away the thing that they should prize above all else, like pitching for new work and clients by doing the work that you hope in future to get paid for, is a kind of self-defeating prophecy that the industry as a whole really needs to grasp. You know, every agency is investing all the time. You could say it could invest its time in things that could generate a more productive return.
Yeah, here. This has been incredible. I've loved this, by the way. But before we let you go, we have to have the wisdom, some wisdom, me and the listeners here with some Toby Southgate wisdom, if I may.
You know, one of the reasons why I love the industry so much is that the people within it have shaped me. Everyone I've ever worked for, I've taken something significant from. And two of the best bosses I ever had were when I was at McCann World Group. Mark Lund always used to say, and I'd heard different versions of this, but Mark's utter focus was on, you know, good news little and often, bad news all at once. And that is critically important, I think, in any kind of human capital business, and particularly something that's creatively focused. And that means a lot to me. I think about it often. And the other, I didn't work directly for him. He was always an impressive person to me. Is Chris McDonald, who always said that leadership's a series of small decisions. And sometimes, like I said, he sometimes would use the phrase, it's chess, not checkers, particularly when he was in America. But I think the notion of leading these kinds of businesses with lots of small calibrations, like constantly making decisions and moving on, rather than waiting for the kind of, you know, single transformational reveal of something that may or may not happen. You know, it's like a melting pat of butter. It needs like constantly whipped into shape or nudged along a table. And those two things, you know, I think about those phrases or sayings a lot. They've definitely changed the way I work. And those people made an impact on me. There's a very famous Peter Drucker quote, so it's much more management-y, but nonetheless, I love it, and it's critical, and it is the greatest failing of most kind of change programs is they overlook the value and importance of communication, particularly internally, right? Organizations going through change, it's hard, right? It's difficult, and to do it properly requires that constant attention, right? Bad news first and lots of conversations along the way. But the Peter Drucker thing is, if you want to get something new, you've got to stop doing something old. And that is powerful, because it just indicates that doing it the old way, no matter how successful, for no matter how long, is no guarantee of future success. And so to genuinely do something new, it does require you not doing some of the old stuff as well.
Yeah, I love that. Addition by subtraction. That's really nice. I like that.
Well, yeah, strategy is the art of sacrifice, right?
Yeah. Toby Southgate, you've smashed this. Thank you so much for being our first guest on Good CEOs. You've been nothing but a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.